Computers will bend to our will. All right. Welcome to Neopets, a gateway to Furdom. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Jaron. I have a Sona that is an orange Bori. More on what a Bori is later. But just for a little bit of context, I've been playing Neopets since 2004, and I've been in the fandom since 2005. More on the details on that in a bit. But I also forgot to start my actual audio. All right, now it's working. And for some context, I've also studied cultural anthropology as my undergrad. I live, eat, breathe, and sleep, and work in museums, quite literally. And I am a moderator over on the r/Neopets Discord. I highly encourage everybody to give a look at that Discord. It's a great community. And let's just get a few things out of the way for people who are coming back to Neopets. No, your Neopets have not starved to death. But they are hungry, and you should log back in to feed them. Also, there's going to be a purge of accounts soon, so log back in so you don't lose your account. Yes, Neopets is back. We're having a renaissance, but Neopets never left. And yes, the site is still a buggy mess. It's always been a buggy mess.
Just as we like it.
And the site wasn't run by Scientologists, but it was funded by them. But don't worry, they were prevented from actually adding things to the site. There's plenty of video essays on YouTube if you want more information about that. And yes, unfortunately, the NFT project was a thing. It was terrible, but thankfully it's finally been canceled. Thank you to the persistence of the community demanding it cease. So what is Neopets.com? It's a virtual pet site, which means that you take care of your Neopet just like you would a regular pet. You groom it, you play with it, and most importantly, you feed it. Don't forget to feed it. Or put it in the Neo Lodge if you want to neglect it. However, there's more to than just taking care of your pet, despite the fact that it's entirely optional. While you're on the site, you could look at fun cartoon graphics, or enter the caption contest, look at the comics in the Neopian Times, look at other people's painted pets. You could explore the world and meet characters in their themed spaces. And said themed spaces would usually be introduced with storylines, so you can see what the latest interactions through the plot lines are, now that we finally get them again. And once you get bored of doing all of that, there's always user-to-user communication, which was a surprising thing to have on a website, especially at this era for a kids site, because it wasn't like just a drop-down menu of pre-arranged chat like speed chat. You actually had moderators, which meant that it was fun for the whole family. And of course, there are games. So the site is chock full of Flash games, or at least it was until Flash died in 2000 and the Neopets team did almost nothing to prepare for it. But now we have like the Ruffle emulator, and you can kind of play most of the games again. But if you're wanting to play other games, there is also the PlayStation game, The Darkest Fairy. Some people only remember The Darkest Fairy, but there's more games. There's actually a couple of puzzle games on the DS. And if you get bored of that, there's always toys and merchandise. There are a lot of plushies to collect. And if you're into that kind of thing, there's also stationery from places like Claire's, if you remember Claire's. So a couple of other key details to know. Neopets is old, at least for internet standards. It was launched in November 15th of 1999, which makes keeping track of which in-game year it is really annoying. And Neopets was considered a very sticky website. What this means is that users that spent time on the site tended to stay on the site and visit lots of different pages. And they would spend a couple of hours on there, which was unusual for the 90s and early 2000s. This gave Neopets an unusual opportunity to sell immersive advertising, which was something that they pioneered in the sense of putting ads in the game. This meant that you could visit McDonald's and feed your pet a Happy Meal, or play games about brushing your teeth with a special toothpaste. All of this immersive advertisement was targeted towards kids, and yes, that's kind of weird, and it was an utter Wild West at the time. Also, because this website is so old, there's a couple of idiosyncrasies that made more sense at the time, namely really tiny images, high compression rates, and everything is done in Flash. And the nice thing about Flash is a Flash video is actually significantly smaller than a full motion video, so any animations or games that they put on the website could be much smaller in size and still load up on like a dial-up internet. This gave Neopets a very wide audience that they could tap into. And all of this worked. By 2005, Neopets had accumulated 11 million unique IPs visiting the site in a month. And that translated to about 4 billion page views a month. That is huge numbers for that kind of time, even if it's actually possible to get 1 billion views on YouTube these days. So all of this meant that Neopets was a very valuable IP, and then it suffered from a capitalism when it got bought out by Viacom in 2007. And they changed a few bits of the website. But to put in perspective just how popular Neopets was, this is the Google trend showing that Neopets was briefly more popular than cheese. So let's meet these Neopets. There are 55 total species, one for every letter of the alphabet. Thank you, Vandegeyer, for picking up the slack there. But like Pokemon, you have many opportunities to pick your favorite. And once you have your favorite, you can go all in and collect them all. So let's look at a few of the common highlights that the community really enjoys. We've got the alien Asia. We've got the plushy Bori. We've got a island Psy Bunny. I also see a Psy Bunny in the crowd. Excellent work. We've got an Eerie, a Darrigan Eerie, a Gray Gellert, a mutant Ixie. This is a baby Kugura, a Croc, a Halloween Loop, commonly called the Wereloop, Lutari, a Fairy Tecco, and of course the Zafara. Shout out to the Zafara in the crowd. And something that you'll notice that a lot of these really popular species is that some of them are just wolf, dog, bunny, chipmunk, dragon, griffin, dragon, deer, anime dragon, otter, lizard, frog, horse, tiger. There's all sorts of just animals. But occasionally they'll mix it up and mix things together. Like the Bori is kind of like a mole and an armadillo. The Vandegeyer is an owlbear. And sometimes they get really wild and creative, like with the Asia and the Zafara, and who knows what they were thinking when they made that. Same thing with the Ogren. Love those Ogrens. And all of this choice leads to people making Neosonas. Shout out to everybody in the crowd who has a Neosona. I've got a photo of a previous meet. Unfortunately, I don't have everybody's name, but I want to thank Tenko, who's in the middle there with the Neopet sign. He's got a database of all of the Neopets fursuiters going. So, the art style. It's very easily identifiable. Even though there's technically 2 different eras, you still have that very cartoony look with bright colors and bold and strong line art. It's very obvious which era is which because in the early days, They didn't really have an art team. It was really just Donna, who was one of the founders, using Flash and using the pencil tool to draw things in, and then everything got a gradient fill. I don't care what color it was a gradient fill. It's a look. But eventually, they finally hired a proper artist team, and it grew over time. And soon they were able to really fill out their art team with a lot more content. So with the new art, we still have these bold, strong lines, but they're really emphasized, and it gets a much more cartoonish look that has a bit more of an identity. Though, because this art team is so large, you actually get a lot of different art styles on the site, and if you get really good, you can pick out which artists are doing what, even if you don't really know their names, because everyone's got a TNT alias. So one of the key things is that they did all of this art in Macromedia Flash, which would later become Adobe Animate. And because this vector art was infinitely scalable, it was super efficient for them to make all of this cartoony art, and then they could shrink it down for on-site items, or they could import it into Flash animations for storyline events, or put it into comics, or even put it into the games without having to redo all of these art assets. And vector art is just very conducive to this cartoony style to begin with. I need to keep up with my slides. Now, where does this intersect with the furry fandom? I think first it's important to understand that being a furry is a spectrum. It's not a binary identity. And it's pretty obvious that you don't wake up one day feeling fully formed a furry. You're influenced by the media around you and the people that surround you in your culture. That's what culture is. It's shared practices and beliefs. So Neopets was likely a lot of people's first foray into this furry positive space, especially in the millennial crowd here. And on the Neopets, anthro animals kind of just wandered about in all of the storylines. They were all throughout the site, just doing normal things and looking good while doing it, even though Neopets wasn't explicitly furry culture. And it was hard to express that furry culture on the boards because of that human moderation. We'll touch a little bit more on why that is later. But at the very least, that served the function of being kind of an unbiased space that was devoid of most of the furry hate that was very common at the time. And I've seen many people of various different levels of furriness who enjoy the Neopets fandom. And I think it's absolutely worth celebrating this range of engagement with the furry fandom. It's super valid to just enjoy hanging out with the furry fandom, even if you don't consider yourself furry. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example of how this kind of gateway worked. Like I said, I joined Neopets in February of 2004, and then I found Gaia online by 2005. Judging from the groans, a bunch of other people did too. Well, the nice thing about Gaia is that the moderation on there was a little bit more lax, and it was basically a forum, and you could talk about anything, and that was where I first found out about even the concept of furries. And what that basically meant, I was like, oh, okay, this is normal. Normal. And from there, I was able to continue that journey onto DeviantArt and continue to orbit the fandom. And then I'm going to pull another one. Then I got into Second Life. Started using furry avatars. And through Second Life, I was also able to develop my own skills in making art and making avatars, which includes the 3D model that you saw at the start. Now, my husband and I, shout out to my husband helping me. We actually met in 2013 on Tumblr because of Lord Cass. There was an Ask blog. Don't ask. We actually celebrated our 5th anniversary last week. Now, I should mention that from 2012 to 2020, I didn't really consider myself to be part of the furry fandom because I didn't really interact with the furry fandom. But I still enjoyed the content and kind of followed it around. But then in 2022, a good friend of mine pivoted on their Twitch channel and decided to also hop in on the furry fandom, and I just came along from the ride and was able to finally fully embrace it and have a social circle to engage with it, which was a great move. So, another aspect of spectrum and identity is you get to be gay on Neopets now. So, similar to the furry fandom, the Neopets fanbase is disproportionately very fabulous. Some of the data that I saw from Furry Science and from the Neopets community surveys put the fandoms at 80% and 60% LGBT respectively. So, shout out to all the gay people in here. So, there was kind of a scuffle, and I will shout out Gray and Heron's amazing talk at MagFest, where they specifically go in on the events that led to being able to be gay on Neopets. In 2020, the Neopets team finally updated their moderation policies and allowed people to express their identity. And so this was a huge moment that allowed people to finally even talk about their sexual identity, because now the Neopets team wasn't conflating having a sexual identity with talking about sex on the boards. So now that we are able to finally be gay, I like to think of all Neopets as being gay, unless otherwise stated. I also managed to sneak in a gay romance onto the Neopian Times, even. The trick is to do it very slowly. And it's also okay if one of the plot characters made you gay on Neopets. I hear it all the time. Specifically Lord Cass.
I wonder from whom.
So, to kind of celebrate the storylines that introduce all of these characters that are handsome and nice, I'm going to talk a bit about the plots.
Yes.
That's supposed to animate, but it's not. Oh well, just picture it moving. So, plots were a big deal. Plots were real-time events where you just had to be there. If you missed it, tough noogies. And if you were sad about it, you just had to stare at other people's profiles with all the little prizes that they got and you didn't. I'm still bitter. But the reason why they introduced all of that is because Neopets was just a website. You had to keep people coming back to serve them all of those ads. So you had to keep it fresh. And especially in the world of 2004, the world of video games was starting to properly flourish away from 2D graphics, and the gaming appetite for 3D experiences was starting to really blossom. So, for context, Neopets launched in 1999 and started really taking off by 2005. World of Warcraft launched in 2004 as well. So, they've got competition for this MMORPG space, even though it's more of a MMOR HTML. So it's kind of like a live service game, but before the term was even invented. And to this day, plots are one of the most requested features on the site. But it's been a really long while since we were able to have a plot. And in between me starting this presentation, making it, they actually started coming out with the new plot, The Void Within. So get hyped for that. So one of the best parts of these plots is that there would always be a wealth of comics and animations to look at and kind of get a sense for who these characters are, what these spaces are, and really fill out all of this world building. For example, here's the bottom two pictures are for the Champions of Meridel. Long story short, 4 kids teleport back in time. There was an animation that showed that, but because of this, they discover the land of Meridel. And the event didn't just stop at them exploring this new place. It also opened up the land for other people to visit. And it added new features for them to explore and play with. And then there was also a war. So the players had an event to kind of interact with each other as well in a competition of which side, Darrigan versus Meridel, who would win. Spoiler alert, it was Darrigan. But like I said, all of this was to increase site engagement and to encourage people to log in every day. And because they were time sensitive, you had to do all of these activities relatively quickly. And they would have you do all sorts of things, including even solving ARG style puzzles, or even playing multiplayer PHP games, which if you understand what that is, I'm so sorry. And of course, during all of this, you would have to deal with the bugs. There was always a buggy mess, but at the very end, you still had this multimedia experience. You had text, images, and animations, even comics. We got a strip from the Lost Desert plot comic when they switched over to that format. And people got really attached to these stories. And so let's talk about the character design philosophy. So the main characters of these plot stories were always anthropomorphized. They didn't have owners, and this is a huge departure from the Ludo narrative of the main site, the game feel, where you're taking care of a pet. These main characters were kind of just independently existing. And humans just straight up don't exist in that context. But humans technically aren't existing in the regular game context, except for the Neopets team, but they're always portrayed separately. And if you want to get really pedantic, yes, there are fairies. Those are portrayed as human-like and always female, but that's a whole separate talk. And they always made sure to make the designs appealing. They had a large audience to appeal to, so they had to make something that everybody wanted. Here's a Neopian Times editorial that explained that no, Darren and Lord Darrigan are not owned by silly username 123. So I'm going to talk about some of the early plots that really set the stage and gave us all of these characters. So the first plot that people would really think about is the Virtupets plot. This is where Dr. Sloth basically came in and was trying to kidnap Neopets and then use his mutation ray to turn them into his minions. And apparently that makes Grundos really buff. And then Dr. Sloth is kind of jank looking until he gets his glow up. A lot of people like Lord Sloth. I did it again. I don't see what the appeal is, but I won't yuck anybody's yum. Next, we've got the Champions of Meridel. This is one of people's favorite plots. This is when we were first introduced to the land of the Darrigan Citadel, who is run by that bat creature thing over in the top corner, and King Scarl, who's next to that. And we get introduced to Jaren Bordir, and we also get introduced to a bunch of other characters that are introduced through all of that fighting in the war. We've got the Castle Guardian and General Galgaroth. And so those are some of the characters that you kind of got introduced into through all of these wars. And then they followed it up with a sequel with Battle for Meridel. And this is by far the most popular plot that I have seen based off of anecdotal evidence. It helps that Lord Cass is there. Lord Cass is a lot of people's favorites, but we also can shout out the Zafar double agent. A lot of people like her as well. And I should mention, yes, the Neopets team knew what they were doing. And I can assure you this because a couple of years ago, some of the Neopets team actually did a live stream. Claire Hummel, Snarky, and the Soup Fairy got together and kind of went down memory lane, and they actually saved a bunch of art and showed this off. These were little doodles that they did to share amongst each other in the office. And so they knew what they were doing. And they also specifically did mention that they do design these pets to be appealing. And it's working. Some people just really, really, really like these characters, like a lot.
I'm normal for cats.
But it's nice to have things that we like. So let's go into Hannah and the Ice Caves. Canrick is one of people's favorites as well. Hannah is also a big fave. In this one, Hannah goes on a treasure adventure quest with Canrick, the walking bad boy trope. And he betrays her, she's cursed, and then eventually she's rescued by the Bori, who are revealed during this plot. And then the Bringer is also resummoned by Galem Darkhand as the Thieves Guild tries to steal the gem as shiny. This ends up causing a war, and the Neopets users had to fight off these hordes of ice zombie things, or they were fighting off the Thieves Guild. But eventually, Canrick comes back, and they work together to defeat the Thieves Guild, and he takes over as the leader. In the Curse of Maraca, we have our ambiguously gay pirate duo, Garen and Jox. And Captain Scarblade is also here. He's doing evil. Then we have the Darkest Fairy game. Everybody loves the Darkest Fairy. So this is a kind of a janky mess of a game, but we all love it. In this one, the Darkest Fairy frees herself from the stone imprisonment and wants to take over the world. And she does, girl bossing her way all through the lands. Tormund over here has his coming of age story and becomes a knight of Meridel and then fights the Loop King, but whoops. This gives the Darkest Fairy the chance to swoop in, and now Brightvale sends Roberta to come and help. They team up, get some help from Jordana, and then also Alfador, he's here too. And they manage to defeat the Darkest Fairy. Also, everybody seems to be really obsessed with Hubert, Tormund's dad. I wonder why. Next, we've got the Lost Desert plot. In this one, Jazan wants to fulfill a prophecy and marry Princess Amira, but she rejects him. But turns out Jazan is super cursed. Tomos and Nabil kind of they're two thieves that work together, and they peace out at just the right time to avoid the whole town getting cursed by Jazan in revenge, where Nabil realizes, oh, Jazan is also cursed and he's suffering. And the only way to break it is true love. So she falls in love with him through a bunch of journals and then gets super married to him. And now Jazan is not super evil, but he's still pretty hot. Now you'll probably notice a pattern. Oops, all loops. And yes, it's pronounced loop. There's an official pronunciation guide in case you're wondering. TNT is also aware of this bias, and they have since kind of taken a step back from all of these loop protagonists. But then we have the out-the-door plot being introduced. There's a lot of characters here. Pick your fave. You can actually still do this plot. So if you want to solve puzzles in an absolutely slogging marathon that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, you can use Jelly Neo to do that. By the way, shout out to Jelly Neo and Herdy and the Image Emporium for helping me get all of these images. This would not be possible without them. Oop, my phone is unhappy. Okay, there we go. Next we've got... Whoop. Wait. All right, just don't touch the cable. Next we've got the Tale of Woe. And this one, Crawley down there, is selling magic potions that fulfills everybody's dream, and unfortunately it's at a price. The whole town gets addicted to these potions and turn into monstrosities of themselves. All of these potions come at a cost, except Sophie doesn't partake in them and manages to swamp witch her way into trying to save the town. But Bruno over here is also a fan fave. Okay. So, next we've got the return of Dr. Sloth. Sloth comes back when Commander Guru takes control of a ship, and in a case of mistaken identity, Gorix and Sylara over here team up to become part of the resistance, and they find out from the scout that a plot to pit, and that's hard to say, Kralidorian Grundos against each other is being executed by a traitor for Dr. Sloth, so that way he can steal the Kraludite. Parlax is the one playing both sides of this civil war, but is eventually outed. Sloth sends his forces to invade, but Gormos and Sylara manage to sneak aboard and use the Space Fairy's charm to seal Sloth back in his prison for good. We'll find out. Also, Commander Gormos is there running errands. Next, we've got the Fairy's Ruin. This was the last great plot. So, strange things start happening when all of the fairies turn to stone. But Bryn and Hanzo, a Meherdalian, or Bright Valian knight, and a thief, make an unlikely pair and also team up with Xandra to try and figure out what happened. Hubert Knox dies in the process of solving this mystery, and they go to visit Balthazar in the process, and we get to see Balthazar's absolute glow up. But long story short, Xandra's actually evil and proceeds to have the most badass moment on the site's history and crashes Fairyland into the ground.
Yes!
Yes, Queen!
Queen shit!
Exactly.
Girl boss!
And eventually, Hanzo sacrifices himself to defeat Xandra. They both turn to stone in a magical explosion. Fiora comes in and Deus Ex Machinas the problem away, and Hanzo is fine, probably. Next, we've got the Altador Cup. The Altador Cup's signups are starting soon, so get ready to pick your team. Here's some... Yes, and spend your plot points. Here's some propaganda of which team to join. There are too many characters to really go over, but some special highlights to our trans representatives. And the first on-site gay lesbian character. I can't remember her name. There's so many names. But she's dating the manager's daughter. So, nepotism maybe? I don't know. Anyway, there's a bunch of other shopkeepers and other errata around the site.
Price Shop Kyrie, my beloved!
Exactly. Everybody loves Price Shop Kiri. And as well as Lady Frostbite is also like top tier, apparently. All right, and The Void Within is the plot that's currently coming up, and everyone is here. So if you have a fave, keep an eye out.
Yeah?
All right, so in summary, with all of these stories and characters and worlds, the Neopets team have carefully curated a deep-running aesthetic that allows them to create a cohesive and anthropomorphic world, despite this all being a complete patchwork of style, content, and spaghetti code, and also user preferences. Everybody likes to play the site in wildly different ways. But now that we've seen how the Neopets team approaches the content of the site, I think it's time that we take a step back and get away from this waterfall of information and focus on the community-created content. So, one of the key elements of the site was the use of message boards. Here you could post messages in a forum style and talk to each other. And you could earn avatars and customize your post, the font, the colors, and people got really creative with this. And because they had actual human moderators, they were allowed full communication. Other than certain words, like basement, snowball, or uncle.
We never knew. Wow.
They just decided on that one. The other ones, you might be able to figure out why. But this made it really difficult to talk about certain items on the website, like the abominable snowman, a snowball, which was one of the pet items. But one of the key areas of these boards is the roleplay board. So this Wild West gave people the opportunity to pretend that they were just about anything, from a warrior cat, wolf pack, you could be a Pokemon, whoop. You could do human things like gifted school, or debatably human things like vampires. And of course, you could be your Neopet. Now, sorry, the reflection is really hard. A lot of people got very into this character creation and would adopt this kind of process with making OCs of their Neopets as well. And so this is kind of where that kind of stemmed off into the creative community that's very much flourishing on the Discord these days, which is probably why this lively community is now a ghost town. If you actually look at the RP boards now, if you scroll back far enough in the posts, some of the posts won't load because they're so old. They haven't been bumped off into Necroland. Ah, okay. Apparently my slideshow ends there according to the... Oh, no. I just have to hit buttons. All right. So Neopets is also very notable for encouraging and rewarding the community for its creative efforts. So they've long hosted these creative contests that Neopets themselves, the Neopets team, will curate, and they'll ask people to send in their fan art and make stuff that inspires them. So one of the key details about this that I simply adore is that the Neopets team has always been consistent about being open to artists of all skill levels. So as long as they can see the effort, you have a chance of getting in. And even if you're a professional artist and you put 20 hours into your drawing, it might get passed over, but you will still be able to send it in at another time. This is super encouraging, especially for new artists, and it helps them engage with the Neopets IP and the world that it's built in on a more personal level. And it gives people this opportunity to develop their own characters and give them image and story and have them have a chance of getting published on the actual site. Even if it's not technically canon, it's still kind of endorsed and everybody can see it. So the Neopian Times is a great example of this. Many different series are currently running on there, and a lot of the times, a lot of the times there will be kind of a mix of how you go about implementing your storytelling in there, where you can use just the original characters that you make, or you can mix in the NPCs that Neopets makes. And they don't really worry too much about how close to the canon that you're taking things. So a lot of people like to use this as a chance to play with those. Excuse me. To play with those dolls and tell new stories. It's also a place for comics. The comics section was one of my favorite parts of the Neopian Times growing up, and like the art gallery, I'd check it every time it came out as soon as possible to see all of this great work. And there's all sorts of series that a lot of people got started on and developed their art skills, and you can see their improvement over time. And a lot of these artists are actually still engaging with the furry fandom, even if they're not engaging on Neopets anymore. They're still using what they learned. So, Neopets' broader impact on the fandom. Neopets had a very large cultural splash, despite being a common game shared by many kids around the world, and it had such a huge peak early on. Every kid seemed to have at least tried it at least once. Who here has not played Neopets before? Okay. So we've got a lot of people who've at least tried it, but despite the fact that so many of us have tried it, there's also this huge overlap between just normies and furries, and there's this mimetic level of, my Neopets are dying. And we had all of these characters that people really loved. Neopets is really niche still. I want to say that the approximate numbers of unique players that still log in every month is about 100,000 players, which is a huge drop. And just as kind of an example of empirical evidence to point to how big of a drop this is, in this search, Neopets turns up 17,000 images, Star Fox 42,000, and anybody want to take a guess at Pokemon? 1.3 million. Despite the fact that all of these were kind of 90s staples. So this means that a lot of people assume that Neopets went the way of Toontown, Club Penguin, and Webkins, and many of the other websites of our childhoods. But we're still here. So to wrap this all up in a bow, Neopets gave us this cast of very pretty characters to look at, let you play with them, and wanted you to creatively engage with the site and other players. And it encouraged you to make your own characters and your pets to interact with. And to let you embrace this furry identity on a site at an early time on the internet. And now, since you can be gay, you can also embrace the identity that you have as well. So thanks, TNT, for that. So Neopets still does have a strong presence off the site. The community has held together by this shared love of this creativity. And quite frankly, the site always taught us how to do this from a young age, from teaching us HTML to encouraging us to draw. And all of this fan art is still common on the Reddit, r/Neopets is great, on Twitter, Tumblr, and also the Discord. I'm going to highlight a couple of artists that are still making Neopets content. We've got Komoroshi. They recently released a set of these wonderful little charms. I am absolutely smitten by these. And also Weezilla, who published a pretty long-running comic called Talk About Random in the Neopian Times. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too into detail. But I did a quick little survey to kind of ask Neopets' impact on people. And I think it's also well worth highlighting not only the ways that it did impact people into introducing them into the furry identity. But it's also important to look at how some people felt comfortable staying on the periphery. For example, I'm sure it had an influence, but it was just another drop in a much larger bucket, which I think is a great way of phrasing kind of the nature of how Neopets was introducing people to the furry fandom amongst this large ecosystem of other things. Now, I think it's time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I think that Neopets goes through multiple designs, because we have such early designs. And I know that the earliest design was a picture of a human man.
Bruce Forsyth, yes.
I wonder, did you or someone in the audience use the site back when it was a human man? And what was that like?
Okay, so for the sake of my microphone, the question was, the Pets used to have an old style art well before the art team was there, and such amazing examples included Bruce Forsyth, and to add to that, Macy Gray was another example of a early Neopet that was just a guy. And what the early Neopets was like. Unfortunately, I don't remember that phase. I did technically have an account back in like 2001 or 2002, but I don't remember anything about it except for the fact that I named my Neopet Furdom, but I don't remember how I spelled it. So that account is definitely gone. But yeah, this is why I think Jelly Neo is such an important resource, is that they do archive those kinds of experiences that would have otherwise been lost. It's important to have good data hygiene and back up these kinds of experiences because, fun fact, Neopets actually disables web crawling on it, so the Internet Archive does not archive it. So, save those screenies that you took.
I was on the website when I was like 6 or 7 or 8, and there were some corners, like a lot of this art had already been like revamped back when, but there were some corners that I guess were just an oversight, and you could still see the old art like that.
Yeah,
So
still
you
some.
left really confused, like by
Oh, yeah.
these really weird or bizarre or even crappy drawings of Neopets that you saw like beautiful in other areas of the site.
Yeah, there are plenty of dusty corners on that website. It's so much fun to find them. AOL buddies, anybody?
In your personal experience, what do you think relates so strongly, what about Neopets relates so strongly to the queer community, so that even before there was a really strong queer community, or at least among a bunch of kids and like young teenagers and stuff, that just happened to find the same thing and all kind of trouble?
That is a great question. The question was, what do you think is the cause of the LGBT and Neopets overlap? Is that a good summary? Okay. I don't know. I want to say I don't know because that is a great research question, and I don't want to just make something up. So I would love to pry more into that, and I think if I were to guess, it would probably just be the fact that there's so much of a overlap of the people who still play Neopets really like Neopets, basically. And so you've got, yes, that's a great way of putting it. There's a lot of elements of self-expression that you didn't always get elsewhere. So I would love to research more into, like, did that self-expression give people more of the ability to feel that way? I'm not sure, especially with how it was suppressed on the site for so long. So, long story short, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah.
So I'm gonna say maybe 2 years ago, I finally sat down and went, all right, what's all this then? And I attempted to create an account, and by that which I mean I made an account, and then I was given a link to a tutorial that gave me a dead page that then crashed my computer.
That sounds about right.
I'm wondering if it's even possible to like make a new account and like get into it now.
Yes, it is possible. They're actually, with the, by the way, Neopets went independent again. So with this kind of rebranding, they're really focusing on getting people back into their old accounts. And so if they're really trying to push being able to recover accounts. So you'll probably be able to just make an account that way. Neopets was also just introduced. It makes it a little odd to get in. Yes. Yeah, so they're working on it. Over in the corner. So the question was how did the TNT feel about being bought by Viacom? What was the second part of the question? No. The Scientology was the early days of investment, and they specifically prevented that from being added to the site. The extent of their influence was the hiring process had a personality survey.
The three are inspired by three people from the Scientology team, which are like a really evil group of Neopets that influence people and poison their minds with.
And to answer the Viacom question, Adam and Donna made a lot of money off of that and squandered it away on crypto projects. And they also were kind of displeased with how it was going to work. The Ogren and Sweet Talk were introduced as parting gifts because Donna hated both of those Neopets. And so that was like kind of a final fuck you. And then I personally love Ogrens. But yeah, there was kind of a mix. There's always going to be some struggles with an acquisition. I would just look at today's modern video game development landscape to see how that goes.
So, you brought up how they're doing new plots and stuff like that. Do you think they would ever to try and bring back old fans in, like redo some of the old plots or anything like that?
So the question was if they would consider redoing old plots. Unfortunately, I don't work for TNT. I don't know the answer to that definitively, but if I were to channel my inner Dominic Law, the current CEO, he would be like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, we'll look into it. More than likely, it's probably not going to happen. They're very focused on this current plot, and who knows what will happen when that's finished.
So I'm very interested in this topic of like modern like pet site spheres and such. With the encroachment of Discord and the like failing of like forms from the bots and such, what do you think the solution is to keep users who are cross communicating on the site and not on third-party platforms like Discord?
That is a great question. How to keep users of pet sites on the site for communication rather than just using Discord? That is a great question, and I'm sure you could make a lot of money if there was a good answer. If I were to say something, I would say embed an IRC client within the page, because Discord's whole shtick is trying to pretend that it's a wiki and a forum and a AOL instant messenger all at the same time, even though it's none of those. I really don't think that I think the culture has moved away from on-site communication, especially when you have to deal with board filters, and you can just do more on a more rich platform like Discord. So that'd be tough.
It's also harder to do the forums on your phone. Discord is an app.
That is true.
Great Max Zephyr.
Any other questions? All the way in the back. Yes.
What's your favorite underutilized species? There is a right answer.
All of that.
I'm going to go with Ogren because they're underutilized. But if I were to speak with my heart, it would be Bori because all Neopets should be Bori. But Can't all have what we want.
Yes!
Google is a great answer. All right, I think I have time for one more question before we get cleared out. Yes.
What are your Neopets that you have? What does
PVH? I think that might have been PHP. PHP is a programming language that is like a server-side actual programming language, not like HTML. But a lot of the pet content, or a lot of the content on the site that wasn't a Flash game, but one where you clicked on things and hit buttons to navigate to new pages to make new things happen, those are PHP games. They operate on the server side and then serve you a new web page every time you want to update the image. It is absolutely fun playing NeoQuest, which is a Dragon Quest ripoff, this way. It is an unhinged way of interacting with the internet. I absolutely love it. Highly recommend. But to answer your question, my Neopets account is full of Bori, except for one Ogren, which is my main pet. If you want to find them, their name is Meeping Cow Dude, and yes, I named him like early 2000s. So random. All right, I want to thank you all for coming out to this talk. It was great, despite the technical issues. And I want to say good night, Mr. Coconut.